Welcome to End of Life University on YouTube. This is Karen Wyatt, and today I'm sharing with you a conversation I had with Cathy Yuhas. She is a registered nurse and a certified end of life doula. We're going to be talking about her latest book titled Walking Each Other Home, Guiding Caregivers and Community Through the Sacred Passage of Death. And you'll enjoy learning about her book, which would be a great asset for anyone to have on their bookshelf. So stay tuned for that in just a moment. And make sure you subscribe to this channel down below. Also, subscribe and leave a rating and review for the podcast wherever you happen to listen. And go to eoluniversity.com/support, and you'll find 3 different ways you can help keep this channel on the air. Also, currently, as this episode airs, I have a new book out called Wild and Holy: A Journey Through Grief, Guilt, and Grace in Italy. So make sure you check that out, and you'll find links in the notes for this episode where you can connect and learn more about that. So we'll go ahead with my interview with Cathy Yuhas. Today, I'm very happy to welcome my special guest, Cathy Yuhas. Cathy is a registered nurse and a certified end-of-life doula who has devoted over 3 decades to supporting individuals and families through life's most profound transitions. As the founder of Dying Matters, LLC, she combines medical insight with soulful presence to advocate for conscious, compassionate end-of-life care. Cathy is the author of Have You Heard You Are Dying? And her new book, Walking Each Other Home, Guiding Caregivers and Community Through the Sacred Passage of Death, which was just released in September 2025 and is available now, which I know that's so exciting to have a brand new book out, and I'm excited we get to talk about it. This powerful companion builds on her earlier work, offering an in-depth guide for those navigating caregiving, loss, and legacy. And you can learn more at Cathy's website, which is dyingmatters.llc. So, Cathy, welcome and thanks for joining me.
Thank you so much. I can't express how happy and honored I am to be here.
Well, I'm really excited to talk to you about many things, about your book, for one thing. But just to hear your story, because I kind of really like hearing about people who started out as a healthcare professional, a registered nurse, and how you ended up kind of gravitating more toward end of life issues and then becoming an end of life doula.
Hmm. So, well, I've done just about everything you can do in nursing except for psych and maternity. But my love affair was basically with hospice and home care and, believe it or not, the operating room. So it's both are very demanding. And when I would reach a point of feeling like I was getting burned out, I'd switch to the other, spend a little time there and go back. And towards the end of my retirement, I felt like I'm not going to be able to sit still for very long, so I better have a plan for when I retire. So it was actually my sister who told me about Suzanne O'Brien's 90-minute free lecture online, and I listened to that, and something absolutely just clicked, and I said, "This is it." So that's how I got started with the thought of becoming a death doula.
Yeah, that's interesting to me because I imagine during your nursing career, well, you said you gravitated toward hospice and end of life care, but I'm wondering if what you saw in the conventional medical system made you feel like there could be a better way or a different way of doing things than what you experienced.
Definitely. I can say there are many times where I've stood at the bedside when people are trying to communicate with someone, and nursing eyes and nursing intuition, you're standing there saying, I can see what's going to happen and it's going to be soon, and yet they're given the message of tremendous hope, and inside I'm screaming, why aren't you telling them the truth? Why aren't you giving them another option or presenting all the options? So
Yes, I remember witnessing so many cases like that, training in the hospital as a medical student and a resident, and always wondering why it seems like we're not really telling this person everything. It seems like we all know that this patient is terminal and will die soon, but no one is telling the family or talking about it?
Well, I think so I I have come to a conclusion that doctors are people too, and they come from the same place that we all come from. We don't want to dash somebody's hope. I really feel that that's where it comes from. And also, I've had conversations with physicians who tell me we are just not trained to communicate in that way. We are trained to fix the problem and move on. So um, I think that's where it comes from, and it would be really nice if we could find a place where we could honor both the physician and the patient, and come from a place of compassionate and authentic, honest communication.
Yes, and I think it feels to me in the hospital like if we approach patients as a team, the doctor and the nurse, if we were all together, it might make it easier to have the conversations together in a way. Someone I know, her husband was in the ICU and she didn't really fully understand what was happening to him, but she said an ICU nurse took her aside, actually took her into like a storage closet and said, "You need to know that your husband is terminal and he is going to die." And she said she was so grateful that the nurse told her that because it changed everything about the last week of his life, what she talked to him about, how she spent her time with him, and they prepared together for what was coming. But it was the nurse who had the courage. She had the courage to tell her, but the nurse had to even hide in the closet because she felt like she was stepping outside of her role or her bounds, but she knew the doctors are not going to tell this wife what's really happening, and she's going to be blindsided when her
Yeah,
husband does die.
I know that feeling completely. I've lived it a lot, and so um, that is probably going to be my soapbox and mission for the upcoming years, to really educate people on it's okay. It's okay to have honest conversations, and it's fair, and people will actually appreciate it, I think.
Yes, definitely. My goal is to work on the medical side of things, hoping we could just train medical students and residents differently so they feel comfortable having conversations. But from your book, it feels like you're saying we also need to train people. We need to train everyday people to be able to ask better questions and to become more aware and be more open to hearing whatever it is they need to hear so that they can prepare.
Yeah, I don't think people even know it's okay to ask questions. You go to a doctor's office and everybody just believes everything the physician says and says, okay, this is what I need to do, instead of saying, well, what would happen if I didn't do that? What would happen if I did this instead? And coming from that place of autonomy and being able to make an informed decision based on all the evidence presented.
Yes, because it is such a two-way street having these conversations. And I guess it feels delicate on both sides. The doctor's afraid to bring anything up, the patient's afraid to ask a question. And these important conversations then don't happen because there isn't a connection, doesn't get made. So we got to figure out how to how to get one side or the other to initiate it.
Yeah, and I also heard recently from the physician I spoke with, he said, I'm sorry, I only have 15 minutes in my visit with this person, and I don't have time to bring up subjects like that. So maybe there needs to be a new model. So maybe the physician says, okay, here's this, and maybe he has a team or staff that can, the person can go there and get more education about it.
Yeah, yeah, so very true. We do. I mean, you're right about that. We need to be realistic about what physicians can handle and offer assistance to them, like having other resources available. And your book being one of those, but also your website, Dying Matters LLC. Maybe tell us quickly what resources people can find on Dying Matters.
Sure. So death doulas can do a lot of things, but they don't necessarily have to do everything. So one of the things that I'm really passionate about is making decisions about what you want to end of life, advanced directives. I'm so passionate about that, that whether you're, once you're 18 years or older, it's anything could happen. It could be a car accident. I have a friend who has daughters, they were in their 30s, that had strokes. So anything could happen at any time. And people need to think about it and not be afraid of thinking about it. That's probably the first thing I like people to talk about is let's talk about death. It's not scary. It doesn't make it happen sooner. So let's just talk about it and hopefully get to that place. And when I do advanced directives, I sit and I go through every little decision that you could make. And somebody when they hear the word, breathing tube and ventilator, maybe all they think about is what they've seen on TV.
Mhm.
And so I'll actually explain what happens, and I'll explain what happens when you do CPR and how sometimes, ribs can crack, and that's not the best outcome for the patient either. And when is CPR appropriate? I mean, if you're late in life and you have multiple comorbidities, I mean, I don't know about you, but I don't want somebody pressing on my chest at that point. So
Yeah, that's such important education for people because you're right. People have really been misinformed through television and movies that have depicted these medical shows that kind of depict CPR unrealistically as being more successful than it is and never showing the consequences sometimes that can happen from CPR. So, yes, you're so right. We need that really careful education for people as they're making those choices.
yeah, and some of the other things that I like to do at first, when I learned about doing legacy work, I thought, no, I don't think I want to do that. But then, before my father died, I was doing a process with him called an ethical will, which is basically going through, where do you remember being as a child? How did you propose to mom? Little questions like that leading throughout your life. And in the end, the person has a good sense of how they've contributed to the world and how their life has meaning. And but the other thing that I thought about after doing that was, wow, you take these values and and you pass them down through generations, you're shaping the future generations. So I love that part of doing legacy work. So now I love doing that.
That's really beautiful. And I like emphasizing that for people who I think it has such a positive motivation behind it for wanting to do legacy work and wanting to think ahead about the end of life because as you said, it involves what you'll be able to pass on to future generations. And there's so much value to that.
I think it's more valuable than passing down possessions and money, just because of that factor of just the thought of shaping future generations. That's
Yeah.
a cool thought.
I know I go back and think sometimes about my grandparents and like I remember hearing certain stories from my grandparents, but I don't remember them well and I've lost all the details. And I mean, they lived through fascinating times, and now I just long for it. I would love to sit down and learn more about what they experienced and hear stories through their eyes. And so, if I could do that for my great grandchildren and grandchildren, that would be a true gift.
Yeah, I wish I had had the foresight. My grandmother was from Slovakia, and I wish I had had the foresight to ask her about her life and what it was like. I did eventually get to visit there, and meet some relatives there, but it's not quite the same as asking her, and I wish I had done that. And my father even said that he wished that he had asked more questions.
Yes, definitely. Well, I noticed you have an advance directive form on your website that people can get.
Yes, I do. So when I started looking into that, I live in Connecticut, and I went on the Connecticut state site, and when I printed it out, I looked at it, and even with my knowledge, I said, what am I supposed to put here? And so I didn't love that. And I also do really like Five Wishes. I like it a lot. So, but I wanted to make it in my own style. So I created one with some other things to think about, spiritual things, music. What do you want the whole thing to look like? And so that everybody knows.
Yeah, yeah, I really like that. And I also noticed that you have is it a starter kit for caregivers for becoming a caregiver or for providing care for
Yeah.
someone, which is another equally important topic that often doesn't get addressed. No one trains the caregiver or talks to the caregiver.
Definitely. So the little handout, which is free, it's basically just to see if you're cut out to be a caregiver, because to me, caregivers are kind of the unsung heroes. First, it's a little bit insidious. You start, calling your loved one, checking in on them once a week, which we did with my dad. And then before long, you're visiting the house and you're starting to notice things. And before long, you're taking them to the doctor's offices. And I remember the year that my dad died, in the beginning, he had two surgeries. And in a 2-month period, I took him to 22 medical appointments. It was exhausting.
Yeah.
And so I think it's important for people to know how to provide self-care and how important it is, and that it's not selfish, how to reach out to other family members, how to get people involved. Um, and, I had a sister who lives in upstate New York, and she couldn't be there physically, but there were other ways that she could help. But just not to take it on yourself and just assume that it's up to you. So, yeah.
And that's such a good point that it can be insidious because it starts out as just helping in a few ways, and then you gradually kind of become consumed by it without even realizing it. And that's almost a point of no return sometimes for people because they've already established these patterns of being the one who's there, who gives all the care. And it's hard then to bring other people in and to get help when you need it.
People lose their identity, their old identity, and their new identity becomes the caregiver. And sometimes they're resentful about it because they didn't ask for it. It just happened.
Mhm.
So, yeah.
Yeah, exactly. That's such a good point. And I know you write about caring for caregivers in your book as well. There's a chapter on that, which I think is very important.
It's probably the biggest chapter. And incidentally, when I was writing that chapter and working with my editor happened to be in a process of caring for her dad, and she just literally broke down and said, I needed this so much. So that was good feedback and good to hear.
Wow, like that's really good synchronicity there in a way. And to get that feedback in the moment because it's such an important role. And honestly, we probably all have people in our lives who are caregivers and we aren't even really aware of that or what they're doing or how much time they're having to spend helping a loved one.
Yeah, it's usually the adult children, and more often it's the women who take on these roles. Maybe because we've been mothers, or I don't know, but it just, why aren't the guys doing more? Although I do know some men who are completely taking this on, but it seems to be the women doing most of the work.
Yeah. Well, your book is a really good companion, it seems to me, for caregivers or people who are caring for a loved one, even from a distance, because it covers a lot of the things that people need to know about, and especially around the very end of life, like the signs of death approaching and like how to have a vigil for a person at the end of life. So talk to us a little bit about, first of all, what inspired you to write the book, and then maybe we can go through what's in it.
Well, so as far as writing the book, it actually started after my dad died. This is almost 3 years ago. Um, and I was in a huge, it was the hardest grief I've ever experienced. And as I was, you get to a place where you're in a really deep place and you just feel like you can't get out of it. And one day, it's like, okay, today I can get up and make the bed, and that's all I can do. Mostly I sat on my sofa looking out onto the pond that I live on. But what started happening was I was getting insight after insight on death, loss, grief, forgiveness, all of that. And I started to journal. And shortly after that process, maybe 3 months later, I ended up with an illness of my own in the hospital for 12 days. Um, had anaphylactic shock and they never treated the actual thing I went in with, which was intractable back pain. But I almost didn't come out of the hospital. Um, and then I realized in retrospect, when I looked through my journaling, I said I was paralyzed by grief.
Mm.
And that really points to that we have to be really careful what we say to our bodies, so our bodies are listening. So after that hospitalization, I couldn't go back to my OR job. And I said, okay, now I need to step up and get my Dying Matters going. And so I said, how am I going to get this information out to the community? So I created a series, 6 weeks workshop series, and it was pretty involved. There were 2-hour classes once a week and very well received. But I realized I have a very death avoidant community here, and I wasn't reaching enough people. So when I looked at all the material that I had for the workshop, I said, wow, this could be a book. Also, I want to do a little plug here because when I listen to End of Life University podcasts, I'm on my treadmill, and one episode was how to write a nonfiction book. So that kind of
Oh,
surfaced.
that's right.
That
I
kind of
forgot about that.
yeah, that surfaced, and I said, okay. And then shortly after that, the two publishers that I have, it's called Publishing Joy, got together and announced that they had started a publishing company. And I basically just said, this is my sign. This is what I'm supposed to do. So I started, and it was very interesting because I was never a journaler growing up. I hated journaling, although I loved English and I excelled at that. Once I started writing, it just poured out of me.
Well, you had a whole lifetime, a whole career full of experiences, really,
Yeah.
that were informing you as the foundation. And so it makes sense that all of these experiences were just there waiting to be tapped into for the writing.
Yeah, yeah.
Well, I know one thing that you mention in the book is that you have a concern for people with a new serious illness diagnosis, and you and I talked about this a little bit. Those are people that sometimes are not fully informed about the trajectory of their illness and what that
Right.
might be, and that you write to people in that situation in the book.
Yeah, so there's two moments. So when that happens, there's what I call precious time. And precious time is that moment when all of a sudden you're faced with this and you get really clear about who you love and what you want in your life. And it's a tender time too. And so often what happens is, we all live busy lives and we think we're self-important, and all of that kind of falls away. And the other thing is the like a precarious time. And I think that it sets people up to sort of have this medical whiplash where you're getting advice from your physician, but you're also getting advice from well-meaning friends. And so it's like, what are we doing here? And so it makes the trajectory feel uncertain, and at the same time, you're having physical symptoms to deal with. And I even currently have a friend who is on top of all of that with all her treatment and chemo and everything. She's having to deal with the insurance companies. So
Mm.
it's a really important time and hard to navigate. And often there's not a lot of support in that.
Yes, definitely. And I've had some patients talk about feeling almost conflicted inside. Like, am I supposed to be focusing on the fact that I'm dying or focusing on how to live, on living? And that's a tough question. And I see why that does feel precarious. Where does my energy go? Where is my focus? And that if I'm only focusing on living, am I ignoring the dying? But if I'm only focusing on dying, am I actually still living my life fully?
Well, what's kind of interesting is that once I finished the book, in retrospect, I realized that the book is about living, and that's what we all should be doing every day in every moment, no matter what you're going through. And, I had my challenges with being in the hospital and nearly losing my life. And that how important it is that every moment is important, to meet it with kindness for yourself, kindness for others, and to be really present for yourself and other people. I try to teach other people to be present for that person. And so, but the book is about living and not
Yes.
just the dying, because we're all going to die. We all know that. So if we just come from that point of view, if we could just get people to understand that we're all going to do it. I mean, we know it, but if we could just keep that in the back of our minds, I think the choices that we make throughout life are more meaningful.
That's so true because, yeah, you're right. The dying will happen, whether we think about it or not, whether we make plans or have an advance directive or not, the dying will happen. So it doesn't need that much of our focus, but we need to be aware of it so that we can focus on living and see just how precious and valuable life is because we can live more fully by choosing to do that. But we could also lose that opportunity, as you said before, if we don't, if we're not aware and we don't view life as precious.
Mhm. Yeah.
Yeah, so that's really powerful, and it makes it all the more important for people to have a pretty good understanding of what's happening and where they are in this trajectory of illness and life and aging and what's happening, to at least have an idea or at least remember that at the end of everything, we all die, and at least be able to keep that in mind.
Yeah, I mean, as I'm aging, I think about it more and more, but I don't think about it in a morose way. I think about it in a way of, okay, what can I still physically do? What kind of joy can I bring into my life? And, the more time goes by, the more I'm realizing that it's basically about connection with people. Connection, I think, is the most important thing, and all the other stuff kind of falls away. And so that's been my life lately, is connecting with people and loving people fully, and being able to say I love you out loud, and not be ashamed of that.
Yes, that's really beautiful. And I see that too. Aging, it's another way of becoming aware of mortality and the fact that things are headed in a certain direction. And when we can look at that and just accept it for what it is, I think what I found is it really helps with priorities because there isn't time to waste on things that don't matter that much. It's much easier to just let go of all the superficial details and just focus on things like connections and relationships that really do matter.
Yeah, and recently I had two experiences. One was a friend of mine who is a musician, and my husband's a musician, and I dabbled in music for a while. And we had a gathering at our house, and 2 weeks later, he was 61. 2 weeks later, he died in his sleep. You just never know when your time is. And my other person, it's been about a year or so, also young, younger than me, and ended up with stage 4 lung cancer. And, you hear this all of the time. I'm going to fight this. I'm going to win this battle. That's another thing I wouldn't mind softening the language around. It's not a fight. Your body's doing something, maybe based on your life choices or your genetics or whatever it is. Why do we have to fight it? But she did. She had plan A, plan B, plan C of chemo rounds, and she got to see, and eyelashes are falling out, hair is falling out, fingernails are falling out, and she was about 89 pounds. And I said, "What's the most important thing to you right now?" And she said, "I need to make it to my son's wedding," which was 9 months away. And I so just very gently asked, "Well, is the chemo, do you think the chemo is helping you get to that point? Do you feel open to have a conversation about hospice?" And she did, which I was so grateful for. And in the end, her pain was under control. She could leave the house. Hair grew back, everything, she kind of started returning to normal, and she did make it to her son's wedding. And I think those are the kind of things we need to think about, life choices on, what's most important.
And it is interesting. I think in our society, we do have that battle mentality, and it's definitely part of the healthcare culture as well, because I have I've talked to patients who they felt like they had to fight their illness and view themselves in a battle in order to please the doctor they were working with who set it up that way. Well, you're a fighter, aren't you? You're going to keep fighting this with me, aren't you? And the patient didn't want to disappoint the doctor or be seen as weak. And that's just a terrible a terrible outlook to have when there are other ways of approaching illness, but that it completely gets lost. As you said, we could soften the language, and yes, we can do what's possible and reasonable to try to work toward a cure. But when it's not possible, if people only understood that, then we could focus in on symptom management instead.
Yeah, I think it's going to take revision of our healthcare approach. And so why not at a very early age can we start with talking about what are your values? You know, how we let's approach things from values, what's important to you. And if we could do that and make it sort of normal, but I get it once again, well, I have 15 minutes for a visit with this patient, but if we could somehow incorporate that
Yeah.
values driven
Yes.
instead of outcome driven.
Instead of outcome. That's perfect. That's exactly the right issue. And as you said, and we spoke of before, maybe we're asking too much of physicians who, as this person says, only has 15 minutes to spend with the patient, which isn't enough time to cover everything that needs to be talked about, let alone the fact that physicians are not trained to have the conversations in the first place. So there's huge obstacle to wanting to talk about end of life issues when you're not comfortable with it because no one ever trained you to do it.
Mm. Another thing that comes up for me is, and when I started doing some research, is I'm seeing nursing homes closing throughout the country. I'm hearing of hospitals closing throughout the country. In our state, there are basically, we have Yale New Haven Hospital and we have Hartford Healthcare and one other hospital. And that's it. They're gobbling up all the other smaller hospitals and any nursing home or hospital that's owned by any private equity corporation, they usually end up failing. So where are people going to go? And so that was part of what was in the back of my mind when I was creating this book is people need the support because pretty soon it's just going to be them. It's going to be us. We're going to have to do it ourselves. And that's just such a scary proposition. I hope things turn around and change at some point, but people are losing health care. And so how do we manage that? Baby boomers, what is it? Something like 10,000 people a day are turning 65.
Yes,
What are we
yeah.
going to do with that?
Phenomenal numbers. And there aren't enough doctors, there aren't enough hospitals, there aren't enough hospices. So you're right. We really need to educate the general public on how are we going to take care of ourselves and one another, and just looking after our loved ones, but also our neighbors and our communities if there aren't enough services available.
Yeah, I mean, even just as an adult child caring for a patient, how do you do that when you have a full-time job? We are lucky in Connecticut that we have something, it's kind of like a paid insurance that you can have if you happen to be out of work for an illness, but it also can include if you have to care for someone who's ill, or a parent. So we're fortunate in Connecticut that it's a paid family leave act that we could rely on, and maybe we could see more of that in other states too.
Yes, I'd love to see that. But I think you're right. It's sort of like we have to take every approach possible right now. Yes, try and change medical education and the culture of medicine, but also try to educate the public as much as possible on how we can do it ourselves. And so many people have pointed out that dying itself doesn't necessarily need a medical facility. It can be done at home. It can be done with lay people helping to care for you and take care of you, but they just need to have some education and a little bit of training in order to do that.
Yeah, and it's not a medical emergency. Think I got that from Suzanne O'Brien. It's
Yeah.
not a medical emergency, when it's happening, step back. Okay, what's the best scenario here? What can we do? How can we make this person comfortable? How can we help them have the most peaceful experience that they can have? I think that's my goal, is that it's peaceful. And it can be. I've seen it over and over and over, and I'm sure you have too. It can be very peaceful.
Yes, definitely. Definitely. And it is worthwhile, I think, for the people who provide the care. And I'm speaking about the very end of life. It's such a beautiful experience. It can be amazing and very healing for the whole family, whoever is there to offer the care. But it can also be exhausting for the caregiver. So that's where we have to try to find the right balance for people.
Yeah, we do. Because I mean, even when I worked in hospice, people have the conception that, oh, hospice is going to be here 24/7. They don't understand. No, they're available 24/7. And I was lucky if I could spend 35 minutes. Sometimes it was even less than that. And I'm basically just managing medications. And there was no time for me to talk about any of the other psychosocial things. It was just impossible. Sometimes in the middle of a visit, I would get a call to go pronounce somebody. So, not to mention putting on 100 miles a day in my car to get from place to place, and then the documentation that goes along with that. So, we definitely need something different. And I thought I heard something about, at one point, I think it was the previous administration, they were going to try to get Medicare to pay more for caregivers in the home. And so I hope we can figure out a way to do that, because nobody should do it alone. And I mean, I've seen elderly people caring for their loved ones as they're dying. Elderly people, they can't even get around themselves. And so we definitely need more.
Yes. And I'm you probably would agree with me on this that I feel like death doulas or end of life doulas offer a lot of hope in this area if we can get more and more people trained simply because they will have skills and they will be able to offer support
Mhm.
and can help teach family members what they need to know to care for a loved one.
Oh, definitely. Everything from what supplies do you need to have in the house, or even walking through and saying, okay, we need to rearrange the furniture. We need to set up the house in this way so it's more conducive to the person being able to get to the bathroom. And I'm huge on safety issues, because for me, that's non-negotiable. That's probably the nurse in me, but I'm always looking at safety issues, and just being able to find resources in the community. I mean, hospice has social workers, but they're overtaxed too. And even, I think my dad, when he was dying, he got a visit from a chaplain once,
Hmm.
and so hospice is stretched thin. And I don't know, I think that's another area that I think we need to figure out how to fix.
Exactly. We need to be able to augment that care, and it does need to be at the community level. I think at the grassroots community level, it's not, I don't think it will happen within the medical system itself because the medical system is already the whole system is stretched and taxed and isn't going to necessarily find solutions for this. But I think within the community, by talking together, training each other, and even in a book like yours that helps educate people, I think can make a big difference.
Yeah, I do have one whole section in there about start thinking about it now. Plan A. Well, how much income do you have? Is your house set up to be, one level living? What if your bathroom's up on the second floor? How are you going to deal with that? Do you have the funds and the means to, you know, put a bathroom downstairs, or get rid of the tub and make it a walk-in shower, and those kinds of things? And everything to, well, if it comes to the point of being in a nursing home, do you know what that means? In other words, you have to pay out of pocket. And I'm just going to use a national average. It's about $15,000 a month. I don't know about you, but I don't know anyone that has that kind of money to do that. And
No.
so what happens is you're forced to go on Medicare and spend down all of your assets. And I think that's horrible. You work your entire life to have these assets and then they're just sort of taken away. I mean, I get it. Something has to pay for it, but and then, encouraging people if they want to die at home. I think most people do, but again, I don't think they understand what that means and how
Mhm.
much work it is for the caregiver. And
Yeah,
so,
that's what I read statistically in surveys. Most people say they would like to die at home, but wow, that's just the beginning. That question is the beginning of a very long conversation
yeah.
that we need to have. Now, what does that entail, and who can be there with you, and what training do they need to have, and how can they feel prepared to offer that? And I guess it's because, I mean, we talk about this all the time. More than a century ago, most people did die at home, but people were living in extended families, and you took care of your grandparents, and they died at home, and you cared for them there, and even the funeral was held at home. But we're so far away from that now. We're so scattered, our families are scattered, and we've just lost those kind of traditions of taking care of each other in the home. So we have to try to reestablish it and re-educate someone how to do that.
Yeah, exactly. But also I've been hearing about things like, well, granny pods are, and I'm running for local zoning here in Connecticut, and I would love to see that we could have accessory dwelling units. So if the person could not age in place, perhaps their family could have a little space in the backyard for one of these, or even the caregiver could live in there. That kind of thing. Or there's a thing called doula houses, which I'd like to look into more, but it's, how we have group homes for challenged people in the community. What if we had a situation like that where maybe two or three people could die in this home? It would be a doula house and it could be run by volunteers even. I mean, just to have people come in and do, you know, change the bed sheets, just help a little bit with all the other things related to dying. And that could be a possibility.
Yes, definitely. And I know, well, there's the Omega Home Network. Those tend to be slightly larger homes, but that concept of community-driven care with volunteers who come in and some trained caregivers as well. And it doesn't have to be medical. It does not require having a medical staff on hand. And that seems like exactly the layer that we're missing.
I
Um,
think that's one of the ways you could get around zoning. Uh,
that's true.
yeah. So if it's all volunteer,
And if you
um,
keep it small enough, a small enough number of people residing in the
mhm,
home.
yeah,
Yeah, I think that's a really good concept because I think we're going to discover there are a lot of people who don't have a safe residence that they could live in at the end of life and
yeah,
don't have caregivers available. And we have to figure out, how are we going to help them? How can we provide that care?
yeah.
So that's going to be one of the many questions facing us as we go forward. But is there anything else I wanted to talk more in your book? You talk about the good death plan, and there's some components you have that should be in a good death plan, and I
Yeah.
wanted to go through that.
So I think the most important thing to have a good death plan is to be able to start with a conversation of talking about it, just being comfortable with talking about it. We have to acknowledge that life is not permanent, and that there's dignity in having a conversation. And I think in order to do that, you have to create a safe space, like we talked about, where there's no judgment, and a willingness for people to ask and answer hard questions. So, and from there, it goes to being able to acknowledge what your values are. So once you know what your values are, you can make future decisions and informed decisions. And I'll go back to the addressing legacy and meaning because I think that's so important. Um, I guess we should throw forgiveness in there. People don't put enough emphasis on that. I think one of the ways to have a peaceful death is to make sure that you have addressed any regrets. It takes a big load off, and I see that that's very useful. But it's not easy for everyone. Sometimes you have an estranged family member, or for whatever reason it is, but at least the attempt to address that. And I think people need to be educated about the actual dying process. Again, it's not like we see on TV. I've seen videos out there about what it actually looks like, the breathing patterns. I mean, I start talking about the changes that happen months before someone starts to die. I'll use my father as an example. He had a less of an appetite. He wasn't drinking enough. He just started to lose those things, and that is the body's signal in a way to start the dying process. Uh, and then what happens, I talk about a little bit about terminal lucidity and near-death awareness and things like that. These things can happen. They don't always happen, but it's important for people to be aware. And once they are, they don't have fear around it, and that can also make for a good death plan.
Hmm. All of those things are so very helpful. And I wanted to mention the idea of forgiveness. I saw that as well in how many times it came up for hospice patients and how many were working on forgiveness. And it really inspired me. I started thinking, wow, I have this list of grievances that I carry around in my head, and I better start working on them now. Because what if I don't have enough time at the end of life to get through my whole list? So it really inspired me to start learning more about forgiveness and really start practicing
Yeah.
it myself every day as something I can do now to take a bit of the load off whenever I do get to the very end.
Sure, and it can be simple. I mean, some people, the other person isn't there in order to do the process, but there's other things you can do, like writing letters just to express it. Um, some people will do rituals such as doing that journaling and then setting it on fire and releasing it to the universe or whatever's helpful. But it's important to do it.
Yes, for sure. And I think forgiving ourselves too, because I think a lot of us harbor self-blame. And in a case when someone does receive a serious illness diagnosis, the question is probably always in their mind, did I do something that caused this? Did I do something wrong? Am I being punished? And that's another issue I wish I could take away from people because I think of the burden of carrying that
Yeah,
through the end of life and how important it is for us to just be able to forgive ourselves and recognize that things just happen sometimes.
yeah.
It's not our fault.
And other things are that forgiveness is not necessarily for the other person,
Hmm.
it's for ourselves. And one thing I say in there is, well, you need to forgive yourself. And why would you do that? You can forgive yourself for allowing other people to cause the harm that you felt. So forgiving yourself for that. It wasn't necessarily your fault. Maybe it's, you know, patterns that you learned from your parents or whatever it was, but forgiving yourself for that too.
Exactly. I think that's really powerful. And we can start doing that at any time. We don't have to even have a diagnosis. We can do that anytime and start working on that. And
True.
I do think that's one of the ways, as you emphasize in your book, and as we've talked about, that um, you can live your life more fully and better once you acknowledge, oh, I'm only here for a limited time, so I have to focus in on the things that matter.
Yeah, it's kind of like a set it and forget it thing. Deal with these things now. You can kind of just, it's done. And then you can just get on with your life and living your best life.
Yeah, that's so very true. Well, I wanted to mention, so I'll mention your website again, dyingmatters.llc. And so it's a great place to go to learn about about the workshop that you have and other assets there, other things that you offer on the website. And your book is Walking Each Other Home, Guiding Caregivers and Community Through the Sacred Passage of Death. And so, Cathy, is there anything else you wanted to mention from the book or anything else you'd like to add?
I think you've covered a lot. I love that you described it like it's a companion because I feel that it is. And if you don't have the support, this could be your support.
Exactly. Something you could keep at the bedside and just to read, even because caregivers are busy and overwhelmed, but just to read a little at a time or look up a particular chapter that pertains to what you need to know more about in the moment.
Sure, yeah, and I just had an example of that where a friend of mine is a hospice nurse in upstate New York, and she said, I have a client whose mother is dying. Maybe there's only 3 weeks left. Can you send an advanced copy? So I did that. And so that person might jump to the section on what are the symptoms? What does it look like when somebody's dying? They could go straight there. And then if there's time, go to the forgiveness and those kinds of things to and the self-care for caregivers part first.
Exactly. And I think that's a great way to use the book to see that there are different sections for where different places where you might be in the trajectory of an illness or in caring for a loved one, and just use it as a resource guide and find what you need in the book. But also, all of us can benefit from reading the whole thing right now if we're not at the place where we need the tools right now, but reading it and preparing ourselves is really helpful.
Yeah, because the first thing is talking about the elephant in the room. That's my little mascot at my workshop. I put the stuffed elephant on the table and say, we're going to talk about the elephant in the room, and that's death.
It's the ultimate elephant, isn't it? It's the biggest one that no one wants to recognize or see. Well, your book goes a long way toward helping us address the elephant and feel comfortable and safe, but also better prepared for what we're going to experience at the end of life. And so, where can people get the book now that it's out there and available?
Yeah, so currently it's on Amazon. And my understanding is that in about 8 weeks from the launch, which was September 17th, it will be on Barnes and Nobles eventually.
Oh, great.
So those
Okay.
are the two places.
So, people, yeah.
Oh, so yeah, and if you were to go to my website and click on the book, it will take you directly to the Amazon site.
Oh, that's perfect. I wanted to mention the book has a beautiful cover. I love the design of the cover on your book.
Thank you. That is by an artist that I got connected with. Her name is Gaia Orion. She is French. She lives in Canada, and it was such an amazing experience. At first, we had one Zoom session. At first, she created something that looked like an hourglass, and I just wasn't feeling it. And then I gave her some other words to think about, like community, caregivers, the person's crossing over, and then people on the other side waiting for them. And she got it immediately. And I really feel like the colors are astounding. Um, and it really embodies the spirit of the book. I'm so fortunate to have met her. And
It's just so beautiful. And every time I see it, I stop for a second. It's stunning. So it just grabs your attention and I stop for a second and I want to look at it again. And so I'm glad I have a photo of it on my computer. So I you're right. It's the perfect cover for the book. It fits it so well. But I
thank
want to
you.
just congratulate you.
It's my screensaver on my phone too. I probably will be forever. So
Yes, it should be. That's wonderful. Well, I just want to congratulate you for having written it and all of the work that entails, but also living the whole life and career that informed the book. And
thank
I'm glad you were able to put that all together and make it available for us.
thank you. And I'm looking forward to your new book.
Oh,
I can't
thank
wait
you.
for that to happen.
Thank you. Yep, it's at that stage of waiting forever for it to actually be there, but
It's kind of like the birthing process.
Exactly, exactly. Well, good luck with the book, and thank you for coming, joining me and talking with me today, Cathy.
Thank you so much. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you.